transpired thus far. Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane late Thursday evening. Around midnight, Judas came leading a large band of Roman soldiers, potentially 400, and they apprehended Jesus and took him back. He went through a sequence, a series of 3 Jewish kind of trials or kangaroo courts, all of which were illegal in how they were conducted and the procedures and so forth, which we talked about in some detail last time. But it started with going to Annas' house for an initial interrogation, probably while they were assembling people at Caiaphas's. And then they went to Caiaphas's house. Caiaphas was the active high priest of that time. And so they began their inquisition of Jesus. Again, they directly asked Jesus questions, which actually is not permissible under Jewish law, Jewish jurisprudence. They have witnesses that they're supposed to interrogate. That's different for Rome. Rome, you can directly ask the accused. Now, with that, then they went through that evening trial of Jesus, and they were looking for something to accuse Jesus. And finally, there was this admission that Jesus is the Messiah, and so now they have something to take to Pilate. The whole thing was set up so they would have charges to bring to Pilate that would allow them to have Jesus executed. And again, we're still in the wee hours of the morning. During that time, Peter had come into Caiaphas's court. He had a little more difficulty than John did, which we talked about. But this is also where we saw Peter's denials, that he denied that he knew Jesus. And so we have those 3 denials at that point. And then they reconvened at daybreak, because remember, all of these proceedings happened in the dark, which again was illegal. So they wanted to have some guise of legitimacy by reconvening at daybreak, which Luke records. They came together, they assessed, or they cast their final verdict against Jesus, and now they're going to take Jesus to Pilate. And so that's where we're going to pick up this time. And so, again, this is a picture of Tiberius. Tiberius is the Caesar over the Roman Empire at this time. Pilate is the Roman prefect that is over the region of Judea. And so he is the one that has legal authority of this area. So we'll go ahead and just jump into the text. We will be using the text primarily today. I have a few slides, but not many. So we'll go ahead and we want to set some context here and remember a few things to keep in the background. And Donna, congratulations on the new grandchild or grandson. No, grandchild. It is a son or a boy. Yeah, grandson. Yeah. All right. So 3 key elements to keep in mind and keep in our minds as we look at the circumstances surrounding Jesus before Pilate. First, Pilate knows that Jesus is not a threat to Rome. And he knows that Jesus is innocent. As we go through and we look at the events that transpire, we're going to see Pilate knows Jesus is not a threat. Pilate, secondly, has a very difficult political situation to manage with the Jews. Remember, his tenure as prefect of Judea has been marred somewhat by some political missteps. Some of them we've talked about. There's many others because he became prefect in 26. And so in the last 4 years, again, he's had, or so 5 years, we're in 33. So last 9 years, he's had some missteps, and these are documented historically. And so it causes some tension between him and the relationship with the Jews. But also remember that within that, as a prefect, a Roman prefect, he has two primary responsibilities. He needs to collect the taxes and he needs to keep the peace. And that's the major concern right now at Passover. It's a time where the Jews are in town, they're celebrating their independence and exodus from Egypt, and there could potentially be 1 million people in this little town of Jerusalem as it swells for this feast. Now, this is the one that everybody's going to come to. And also remember that part of the reason why this situation for Pilate is so difficult is because of his relationship with Sejanus. Remember, we talked about Sejanus, who Tiberius had as his number two, basically ran the empire for him so he could just, party on down in the Isle of Capri. And Sejanus, it got to his head. He had a coup attempt, and Tiberius, cut him off. And not just Sejanus, but that whole large circle of friends that went with them. They were all executed as well in the process. But the kind of the executioner's line didn't make it all the way to Pilate. But there is some concern, where is Pilate at? So not only does Pilate have to, manage the situation with the Jews, he's also in the situation where, I'm on shaky ground with Tiberius too. And, we know what Tiberius's default action in this case is going to be. So, third, as we go through this, Pilate is looking for a way out. He's looking for a way out. He wants to set an innocent man free without causing a riot, without getting his head chopped off. So, all right, we'll start in Mark, and we're going to be in Mark 15, and we'll start here. So early in the morning, the chief priests and the elders and scribes and the whole council immediately held a consultation. So this is that early morning, reconvening, and binding Jesus, they led him away and delivered him to Pilate. Pilate questioned him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered, "It is as you say." The chief priests began to accuse him harshly. Then Pilate questioned him again, saying, "Do you not answer? See how many charges they bring against you?" But Jesus made no further answer, so Pilate was amazed. So we know Jesus, when he's accused, he's remained silent. Now, we'll see as we look at John's account, there are a few more interactions in this dialogue between Jesus and Pilate. And, presumably what's going on here is we'll see where this is taking place. I got a couple of pictures of it. I didn't include pictures of the actual judgment seat. If you've been to Jerusalem, you may have seen it, where this has transpired. And there's a door there. And it's quite likely that during some of these conversations, Pilate brings Jesus inside the praetorium where he's at, Herod's palace, questions Jesus privately. And so then we'll have a little bit more of that dialogue back and forth. So we'll talk about that as we go. All right. Luke 23. Luke's going to add another detail about some of the specific charges that were brought against him. Then the whole body of them got up and brought them before Pilate. So they're going in mass. They began to accuse him, saying, "We found this man misleading our nation, forbidding to pay taxes to Caesar." What job number one? I got to collect taxes. And saying that he himself is Christ the King, i.e., insurrectionist, rebellion, disruptor of the peace. So Pilate asked him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And he answered and said, "It is as you say." Then Pilate said to the chief priests and the crowds, "I find no guilt in this man." So I was just a little bit more of the dialogue here, right? It's like, look at this guy. We heard him say this, and he's, I see no guilt. But remember that assessment. Pilate's going to have that assessment from really the beginning throughout the whole time. And he's not into just being the henchman here for someone the Jews don't like. I mean, he's not fond of the Jews either, but he has to manage the situation. Then Pilate, go ahead. Jews were going to push the idea that Romans said Jesus is dangerous. He's a king. So why do you think? Well, that is kind of what he's saying. That they are. That was their charge. Pilate asked him, "Are you a king?" And he says, "Yes." He says, "I don't find any fault." Why would the dialogue in John? So we started in Matthew, or no, in Mark, because Matthew doesn't really add anything. That kind of gives us the context. Luke adds a little bit of the details of the charge, and that's a great question. And then John's going to record a little bit more of the dialogue. And so let's see if we can answer that a little bit more when we get to that. But they kept on insisting, saying he stirs up the people, teaching all Judea and starting with Galilee, even as far as this place. So notice that the Jews here now say he's starting from Galilee. And so he stirs up the people, teaching all over Judea, starting from Galilee, even as far as here. And so now Pilate hears that Galilee, that's Herod's territory. That's a different jurisdiction. You know what? I'm going to let Herod handle this. Transfer the case to, the Galilean leader and let them deal with it. Because Herod Antipas doesn't have any connections with the Jews. He's not under this constraint that Pilate is under with this strained relationship. And Antipas was schoolmates with Tiberius. They're friends. So that's an easy thing. He's like, you know what? I'll send him to Herod. And so this is option number one for a way out. Just give it to Herod. So he's going to do that. When Pilate heard it, he asked whether the man was a Galilean. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who himself was also in Jerusalem at the time. We're going to pick up back there in a minute, but let's go ahead and there's one thing I want to see. We'll see it. I want to see if I can capture it here. Sometimes these verses off the top of my head don't uh, jump up exactly as we're moving from section to section. Uh, yes, okay, so one of the things that Matthew says, look in Matthew, and we're going to look here at this verse, verse 18 of chapter 27. So Pilate said to him, "Who do you want me to release for you?" This is the we're going to get there with Barabbas. But the reason is he knew that it was because of envy that the Jewish leaders had handed him Jesus over to Pilate. So he knows that they don't have pure motives here. He knows that they've got ulterior motives. It's not as it's cracked up to be, that this is a kind of a cracked case, and he knows that from the outset. Okay, so that's what I wanted to. So let's go to John. So here in John, that's Luke. We'll go to John. We go. No, John. Okay. 18. Okay. led Jesus from Caiaphas into the praetorium. So this is where it's happening. And I'm going to show you some pictures here. And it was early. So again, we're trying to do as much as this as we can before Jerusalem kind of gets up and gets going. It's daybreak because the Jews had to do their last kind of, okay, let's seal him, his fate at daybreak when it's quote legal. And now they zip right over to Pilate. So we're still kind of like 4:30 in the morning type frame, 5, still very early because he's going to be on the cross by 9 a.m. So that's kind of about the time frame that we're at here. And there's several things that have to go on between now and 9 a.m. So they led him to the praetorium. And I want to show you a picture of this. Okay. So this is a picture of the model of Jerusalem that's at the Jerusalem Museum in Israel. And it kind of shows you how Jerusalem was during this time period. I've shown you some pictures of this before. Things to note is the temple is right here, in the middle. You see my mouse? A little bit. Okay, should have changed the color on the mouse to make it easier. But here is the temple. Here's the wall. Now, remember that the wall is going to be destroyed in AD 70 with everything else here. And so when we talk about the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall that's in Israel today, we're really, you see this line kind of down the middle? That's the foundation line. So basically, what we see here in when we go to the Western Wall today, that's just the foundation. Everything that the temple walls and the temple itself was above that. So we're basically looking at the part that would, be below ground or was just built up to be a solid platform for the Temple Mount. And so that all gets thrown down. But that kind of tells you where we're at. And then we see this big structure here, just a little down, a little bit to the west of the temple. This is Herod's palace, Herod the Great. Okay. So remember, Herod the Great is the one who was really the last king over the whole empire. He died shortly after the death of or birth of Jesus, birth of Jesus. Um, but he's also the one that ordered the slaughter of all the children in Bethlehem that were 2 years old or younger. So we talked about Herod the Great a lot during, I believe, the third week or so, second or third week. And Herod had this palace. Now, when the Herod died, part of the administration, well, it was split up between his sons, and then Judea, because Archelaus was a disaster in Judea, Rome took over and said, we're putting a prefect here. And so now we have a Roman government civil official over Judea, and with that came Herod's palace. This is kind of like the political capital center of Jerusalem or the empire, which would make sense. So it's a nice place. Praetorium, they got guard, all that. You can tell it's very secure, appropriate place for leaders and kings and so forth. And Herod Antipas is in town. Herod Antipas, whose dad was that? Who was his dad? Herod the Great. This is his childhood home. So when Pilate comes into town, he's going to stay here. Now, on occasion, he may stay in Antolia, which is kind of this fortress up here in the corner where the soldiers stay. Some will speculate that. He'll go there occasionally. But if you're the prefect and you have all of this under your power and authority, you gonna go stay with a bunch of soldiers in a little cement, enclave there, or are you gonna stay in the palace that you have access to? Well, you're gonna stay in the palace. So Pilate's gonna be here. Now, where do you think Herod goes when Herod comes to town? He goes to his childhood home. They're kind of gonna have some kind of shared of arrangement here. So it's like, Herod can come in here and use that. And so, probably with a situation like this, Pilate's on one end and Herod's on the other. Big enough for both of them. And then there's this courtyard in the middle. So we think about it, we read our Bibles, and we don't know the context, even though it tells us Herod was in Jerusalem too. Like, oh, he sent him to Galilee, or he sent him somewhere across town. How did this all work? And the time involved. They just gave him the soldiers and say, go knock on Herod's door. I got this guy for him. Yeah, go ahead.
Their definition of praetorium, or is that a place? Maybe I don't know.
Praetorium. Yeah, so the praetorium is, and there's a definition, great question. We think of the praetorium, it's like the Praetorian Guard. It is the, and then it's going to be associated with a place as well, but it's really the praetorium is the guard that is associated with the Roman Empire to keep like the emperor or the political officials safe, like their personal bodyguards.
I've heard of the Praetorian Guard.
Yeah, yeah,
Praetorium as a place.
yeah, right. And so the praetorium there is going to be a place where the guards are at, because that's where the political official is at. Yeah. Okay. So when it says that he sent him off to Herod, he said that wasn't a big journey here. Okay. So let's continue. We're looking at John. Sent him into the praetorium, and it was early, and they did not enter. So the Jews did not go in, because this is Gentile territory. This is like going into a Gentile's house. Why would they not do that? Because they haven't served the Passover yet. Remember, we talked about Passover on Thursday for those in Galilee, Passover on Friday for those who are in Judea or and Jewish, because of the different calendars that they were on, and it logistically facilitated a lot of things. And so they didn't want to go in because they would have been unclean for the Passover, which is why it says, so they would not be defiled, but might eat the Passover. So they're going to stay outside. And if you go to the temple, or go to Jerusalem and go to this praetorium area, you can go out here and you can see a place where there is a like a doorway and into the wall, and a like a judgment seat that was set up to conduct these matters, because they didn't bring the public into the court typically, and so they would do it outside the wall there. And I have some pictures of that I should have included. All right, moving on. What accusation do you bring against this man? And they answered, this man were not an evildoer, we wouldn't have delivered him to you. So he's a bad guy, just take our word for it. That's kind of how John says it. So Pilate said to them, take him yourselves and judge him according to your law. We are not permitted to put anyone to death, which we know they follow only when they have to, because they killed Stephen, right? Outside. So again, this is like, we can't kill this guy, he'll start a riot. So Pilate said to him, take him yourselves, judge him according to your law. Okay, we can't put him to death, to fulfill the word of Jesus which he spoke, signifying what kind of death he was about to die. He said he was going to be crucified, and that would be a Roman thing. Therefore, Pilate entered into the praetorium. So he's going to go inside, and he summoned Jesus, and he goes with him. So now we have a private conversation. It's said that the Jewish leaders wouldn't go in because they didn't want to be defiled. And so now we have Pilate and Jesus alone. And so we're going to have that interaction that Doug asked about. Why is it that they, it says, you're a king, I'm a king, and Pilate comes back and says, I don't have a problem with this guy. And it's because of what happens here. And how do we know? Either the Holy Spirit told John what happened. Most likely when Jesus comes after the resurrection, he's going to spend time with the 11 remaining apostles. he's talking to him about this, or at least John. And Pilate entered in and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus answered, "Are you saying this on your own initiative, or did others tell you about me?" So this is kind of a spiritual heart check. Like, Pilate, are you curious about who I really am, or are you just kind of puppeting what other people say? It's also kind of a thing about, Pilate, do you think for yourself or not? So there's kind of a little bit there. And Pilate's going to answer and basically say, I could care less. He's like, I'm not a Jew, am I? Your own nation and the chief priest delivered you to me. What have you done? So he's like, look, I'm not into this stuff. Okay. Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. And this gets to the heart of your question. If my kingdom were of this world, so if everything what they said were true, then my servants would be fighting, and I would not that so that I would not be handed over to the Jews. So it's like, look, the fact that I'm here, like, you're aware of all of the crowds and the people that follow me. You know what happened on Sunday morning when I came into town. If I was here to cause a problem, there would be a problem. I wouldn't be in front of you right now. And he's like, but as it is, this is where we are. And so Pilate is starting to get it. And he goes, my kingdom is not of this realm. So when you get into the spiritual kingdom and all that, I don't want to go into there. I don't believe that's what Jesus is saying here. I think what he's really saying is, yes, I am the king of the Jews, and he'll say that explicitly, but that my kingdom isn't now. This isn't the time. This isn't the place. I'm not a threat to you. And so that's really kind of the background here. And so, therefore, Pilate said to him, so you are a king? And he answered, you say correctly that I am a king. For this I have been born, and for this I have come into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone who hears the truth hears my voice. And Pilate said to him, what is truth? Right? We all know about that expression. I don't want to get into the whole epistemology here and what Pilate's trying to reason and think, but he's basically saying, look, we got all kinds of people saying different things, but he knows from what Jesus testified, he's not a threat. That if he were really a king, in a sense that he was a threat to Rome, there would be a riot right now. And so he's satisfied. Pilate is satisfied that Jesus is innocent, that he's not a problem, and that these charges are bogus. And so when he said this, he went out again. So he's in the praetorium with Jesus privately. He's going to go outside the wall of the praetorium, back to where the Jewish leaders are, the chief priests and the scribes. And he's going to say, I find no guilt in him. So again, over and over again, Pilate's going to find him innocent. But you have a custom that I release someone for you at the Passover. You wish then that I release for you the king of the Jews? So they cried out, saying, not this man, but Barabbas. And now Barabbas was a robber. We learn from the other synoptics that Barabbas was actually a murderer and an insurrectionist, someone that Rome didn't want to have around out free because he was part of a rebellion apparently beforehand. So that's the option. And again, remember I said Pilate's looking for a way out. He's looking, this is like he tried to get a way out with Herod. Here's a second attempt to find a way out. He's like, well, wait, Herod, well, we haven't got to that yet. Uh, you know, Herod's going to send it back. Here's another place where he's going to try to get a way out. And that's like, well, hey, let's use this mechanism where I release somebody to set Jesus free. Because he doesn't want to crucify an innocent man just because the Jewish people want to do away with him. Now, also note here again, when he took him inside the praetorium, Pilate directly questioned Jesus. That was okay under Roman law, but it was not okay under Jewish law. During that whole time that he's here and this process is going on, not obviously when Jesus was inside with Pilate, the chief priests were they're continuing to accuse Jesus, and Jesus doesn't answer. And so Pilate's determined he's innocent. So let's move on. We're going to go to now before Herod. This is only recorded in Luke. So this is where Luke's giving us another detail. This is a place where the synoptics all kind of come together and add different pieces together. And so in chapter 23, starting in verse 8, well, I'll pick back up again in verse 7. And when he learned that he belonged to Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod. So again, across the court there, most likely, who himself also was in Jerusalem at the time. Now, Herod was very glad when he saw Jesus, for he had wanted to see him for a long time because he had been hearing about him and was hoping to see some sign performed by him. So remember when Jesus was ministering in Galilee, and after Herod had John the Baptist beheaded, people, he was concerned that this is John the Baptist risen from the dead, and all kinds of things. But he was well aware of what Jesus has been doing, and he wanted to see Jesus, basically do magic tricks, do a miracle for me. So he questioned Jesus at some length, but Jesus said nothing. Can you imagine how frustrated someone like Herod had to be? You bring this little peasant off the street, and you're asking him questions, he's not going to answer you, not going to give you the respect that, you know. So the and he's already been roughed up by the Jewish people, right? And so now the chief priests and the scribes were standing there accusing him vehemently. So even though Herod isn't really tied to the Jewish people like Pilate is, because a lot of that Galilean area is more Gentile, and he's not twined with the Jewish culture in the same way that Pilate is at this point. He says uh, his soldiers, Herod and his soldiers, after treating him with contempt and mocking him, so they're not being very nice, dressed him in a gorgeous robe and sent him back to Pilate. So Pilate's hoping that this case is over. I solved that by going in for breakfast. And all of a sudden, what's that? Oh, Herod sent Jesus back. What do you want us to do? And it's like, I'm sure Pilate was thrilled. So he takes him and he summoned the chief priests and the rulers and the people and said to them, "You brought this man to me as one who incites the people to rebellion. And behold, having examined him before you, I have found no guilt in this man regarding the charges which you make against him. And Herod hasn't either, for he sent him back to us, and behold, nothing deserving of death has been done by him." So it's like, we can't execute this guy. Therefore, he's trying to find a middle ground. Like I can't execute him. He didn't do anything wrong. He didn't break any Roman law. I'll tell you what, we'll beat him up and then we'll give him back to you. Got to make everybody happy. And so therefore I'll punish him and release him. Now, he was obligated to release to them at least one, at the feast, one prisoner. Now we're going to get into the Barabbas situation. And again, the crowd's going to be saying here, away with this man, release for us Barabbas. He was one who had been thrown into prison for an insurrection, made in the city, and for murder. Now, at this point, I need to bring in a little bit of historical preaching information. Now, some of you may have heard this or heard of it, is Charles Swindoll. Has a kind of famous uh, sermon that he gave. I think it was Swindoll, definitely Swindoll-esque. And he basically is talking about this event. And he's thinking about it from Barnabas's perspective. Barabbas, I was yeah, Barabbas, not Barabbas. Thank you. Uh, so the fortress Antolia is up here in the corner. That's probably where Barabbas is at. And so the kind of the illustration goes like this. Barabbas is in the cell. He doesn't know anything about what's going on, but he knows it's the festival and all this. And all of a sudden, he hears this big crowd of people saying, Barabbas, Barabbas, Barabbas. Because he can't hear all the detail in between. And a little bit later, he hears, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. And then the soldiers come in to get him, you know? And so it's great preaching. Unfortunately, this is not accurate because everything that would have to occur up there happened down here, and Barabbas wouldn't hurt any of it, you know. So, but it's a great story. Too bad it just isn't true. Kind of like the under rowers, you know, the guys in the ship or whatever. Total misunderstanding of that word. It doesn't exist. It never happened. There were no such things as under rowers. It's physicists have looked at that. It's impossible. You can't build a boat that works that way. But whose lexicon did that? Any? I don't know. It's there was a lexicon in the early 1900s that did that, and it made a great preaching illustration. And you read commentaries; it's been perpetuated for like 120 years, almost, at least 100 years, and it's because of someone made a bad decision on how they explained a Greek noun. Okay. Anyway, all that to say, that's a great story. Just didn't quite happen that way. But they did cry out Barabbas. They did say release him. And Pilate, wanting to release Jesus, addressed them again. But they kept calling out regarding Jesus, crucify, crucify, crucify him. And they said, what evil has this man done? I found no guilt in demanding death. Therefore, I'm going to punish him and release him. Again, he's kind of resisting the crowds, but they were insistent with loud voices asking that he be crucified, and their voices began to prevail. So now he's in the situation where he's got a large number of people screaming for crucifying Jesus. They're getting irritated, agitated. He's got to keep the peace. So he's kind of at this point, okay. So Pilate announced sentence, and their demand was granted, and released the man they were asking, who had been thrown in prison for insurrection and murder. He delivered Jesus to their will. And so there, let me see, let me go back to Mark, if there's anything I want to add in here. Okay. Yeah, Jack.
Somewhere. Oh, I thought one of the synopses says that they were fighting crowd.
Yes, yes. And what's that? Yeah, right, yeah. Yeah, the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to put Jesus to death, right? And I think, is it in Mark where it talks about how they did that, and they did it again. 11. Yep. The chief priest stirred up the crowd, yep, and asked for the release Barabbas. So that's what you're alluding to right there. Yep.
Right, so it may be crowd in Rome but this at 6 in the morning was not so much returning of Jerusalem as it was you had some people showing up who had this leadership who were bringing in witnesses and inciting those who were gathered. This was pure supposition. So anyway, I just find it.
Yeah, no, great question. Let's loop this back to what happened on Palm Sunday. So there's going to be some different groups of people here for sure. Um, and that the group that's on Sunday morning or on Friday morning with the crucify him, at the very most, it's just a subset of the group that was there on Sunday. Could have been different. Not everybody showed up Sunday morning, but it's not going to be everybody that was there on Sunday morning. But again, remember we kind of went through this Passion Week saying, given Sunday, why Friday? And the answer was Monday and Tuesday. Remember, Jesus was teaching in the temple Monday and Tuesday, and he was inciting the Jewish leaders, getting everybody all riled up to the point where they wanted to kill him, right? And they're convening Tuesday night. How do we kill this guy? We can't let him out of Jerusalem, kind of thing. And the reason for that, he stirred it all up, but that made the people choose. Who are they going to follow? Are they going to follow Jesus, or are they going to follow the Jewish leaders? And so it's all nice and great when you have the Messiah riding in on a donkey, and he's just been with this caravan for several days, and people are coming into town and telling him what he's doing. Great. Then you have Monday and Tuesday where Jesus just creates a mess everywhere. And then you have, what do you think about this? I can't believe he said that to the Babylonians. Did you see what he just said? Wouldn't be Nicodemus, but someone like Nicodemus who didn't follow Jesus, you know? I can't believe he did that. Whatever. They're busting cultural norms, everything. And then you get to Friday. And not everybody's going to be up at, dark 30 to yell in the street, crucify, crucify, crucify Jesus. But there's going to be a group there when they kind of hear what's going on. I'm sure the Jewish leaders are bringing in kind of the group of, there's always people. We're in an election year. You can come any kind of crazy political topic, and you'll find that there's a bunch of people that are going to be for it. And they're going to hold their signs or march around the Capitol. And I'm like, really? They for that? Well, there's same here. There's always going to be a group of people that want to be close to the circle, or kind of be seen to be going along, be a good Jew, or whatever, and they're going to go along with it. So I'm sure those people are the ones that kind of get, hey, this is going on. Come down and okay. And then people are going to start hearing about, hey, something's going on down at and then you get the crowd mentality, right? There's all kinds of studies that say people will do things in a crowd or go along with a crowd that they would never do if it was just by themselves, right? So there's kind of that emotional element too, like root for the Rockies, right? Sorry. Shouldn't say that they're a home team, even though they don't win. I will say, I said on that. The reason I say that newscast, I couldn't believe it. What was it? It was this past week. One of the reporters, they it was either they said something like, and I don't follow the Rockies, but it's like in shocking news, the Rockies lost or something like that. Just total sarcasm. So anyways, if you're a diehard Rockies fan, my apologies. I'm not here to. Okay, go ahead.
Um, but wasn't there also the threat? I mean, their whole life has been around these in this the way they um, uh, worship and all that stuff, and they want maybe to follow or they like what Jesus was having to say, but the thought of being ousted out and being cut off from their from the synagogue and from not being
Well, that would have been the case if they were supporting Jesus specifically. Kind of like an individual kind of situation, I think. There, in this crowd setting, I don't think that's going to apply. I mean, they can't kick everybody out of the synagogue. And again, the chief priests and the scribes, well, the scribes are a part of it. I mean, we get into this. Remember, the Sadducees control the temple, the Pharisees control the synagogues. But here we're talking about the Sanhedrin level. We're gonna have them all both together. But I don't think that's the bigger concern here. Um, of where people have it being put out if they don't. It's more of, I mean, there's so many things. You know, why do we have people? Well, here's a real example. Forget the sports one I just did. Why do we have people on college campuses, rooting for, you know, Palestine, anti-Israel? Why is there such a thing called Jews for Gaza? I mean, we can't figure that one out. Yeah, Doug.
More personal opinion, but I think that here's Jesus coming in, driving donkey, people are yelling, save us,
Right.
he's declaring himself to be the king, the Messiah, the promise. Now here he is a few days later, held up by the being being persecuted, held and captive by the leadership. I think people are like, hey, that really makes me angry. I thought this guy was going to be just wonderful. He turns out he's no better than the rest of them. Captive looks like he may be murdered.
Well, yeah, I think absolutely. I think that's an aspect of it. It's like really the guy that we thought was so great, now he's in jail. They got him,
Yeah.
right? But also that also underscores Jesus' point. If I was here and I was a king, I was an insurrectionist, all these people would be here on my behalf, and they're not. Okay, so they're going to go ahead and send Jesus out to be crucified. We'll just continue on here in Mark. Soldiers took him away into the place that is the praetorium, and they called together the whole Roman cohort. So they dressed him up in purple. They twisted a crown of thorns. They began to claim, "Hail, King of the Jews!" Keep beating his head with a reed, spitting on him, kneeling and bowing before him. And after they mocked, they took the purple robe off and put his own garments on him, and they led him away to crucify him. I think Luke's going to be the one that tells us that Luke or John, they um, divided up his clothing. It's just going to be, let's look at John. Okay. Yeah, they had the crown of thorns, crucify him. And oh, there's one thing I gotta say here. So, verse 8, therefore, when Pilate heard this statement, okay, we got a little bit more. This is what's going to really kind of seal it for Pilate. So Pilate came out again and said, behold, I'm bringing him out to you so that you may know that I find no guilt in him. Jesus then came out wearing the crown of thorns that they had made, the purple robe. Pilate said to him, behold, the man. So when the chief priests and the officers saw him, they cried out, saying, crucify him, crucify him. And he said, take him yourselves and crucify him, for I find no guilt. The Jews answered him, we have a law, and by that law he had to die because he made him out to be the Son of God. That's the Messiah, right? They don't have a problem with him being king. Therefore, when Pilate heard the statement, he was even more afraid. And he goes into the praetorium, he talks to Jesus, where are you from? And this time Jesus doesn't say anything. At first, do you not speak to me? Do you know I had the power to release you? And he's like, you would have no authority over me unless it had been given to you from above. For this reason, he who delivered me to you has the greater sin. Like, Pilate, I know you don't want to kill an innocent man. I know you know what's going on here. The guilt is not on you. It's on the people that gave it to me. He handed me over to you. As a result of this, he made efforts again to release him. The Jews cried out. Here it is. If you release this man, you are no friend of Caesar. Everyone who makes him out to be a king opposes Caesar. So remember, Pilate had a ring on from Tiberius that marked that he was a friend of Caesar. I talked kind of about that fellowship of the ring kind of thing. Those that were part of the inner circle had gotten a ring from Caesar that dictated that, hey, I'm with the king, I'm with the emperor. Um, and now they know that Pilate is on shaky ground because of Sejanus. And he's like, if you let this man go, we're going to tell Sejanus or Caesar Tiberius what you did and that you're not on his side. And so it basically put Pilate in a situation where it's Jesus's life or mine. Pilate had no choice. We can all look at this. Pilate can say, I have the authority to release you. I have the authority to crucify you. In one sense, that's true. But when it comes right down to it, with the political situation that the Jews just cornered Pilate and put him in, Pilate had no choice. If he were to let Jesus go, he would have been executed by Tiberius. That would have been the ultimate outcome. So, um, yeah, yeah. We have no king but Caesar. Exactly. So that's what's going on. They're going to hand him over. They're going to take him to Golgotha. He's going to write on it the King of the Jews in Greek, Hebrew, and Latin. Jews are going to complain and say that he said he was the King of the Jews, and he's going to say, hey, I've written what I've written. And that's going to be it. I won't go into all the details here of crucifixion, but I do want to kind of wrap up with one thing here. We're just going to talk about the fact that Jesus really died. You know, some can talk about, well, what happened here when it comes to did the resurrection really occur? People want to have, something to say about an empty tomb, and they're going to say, well, maybe Jesus didn't really die. There's a swoon theory that, with zombies or whatever, they drug them out, and it seems like they're dead, and they revive them later or wears off. But that didn't happen here. That's totally debunked. But then there's also, did someone steal his body and all of that. I'll talk a little bit more about that next time we look at the resurrection. But if there's going to be a resurrection, you first got to have Jesus being dead, right? And one of the things here that kind of nearly all historical scholars will say, will accept that Jesus is a historical person and that he died. You'll always have fringe, but nobody really disputes that Jesus is a real historical person. May have some individual or concerns about claims or this or that. And they'll say that Jesus died and even that he was crucified by the Romans. So, in order to prove that Christ rose from the dead, which we'll talk about next time, it's necessary first to establish that Jesus actually died. All four Gospels record Jesus' death by Roman crucifixion, and it is referenced in several other New Testament epistles. Now, Gary Habermas, who has a minimal facts argument, where these are things that everybody accepts to be true, or almost everybody, so that should be enough to cause question. Of all the events in Jesus' life, of all the events of Jesus' life, more ancient sources specifically mention his death than any other single occurrence. So you got the feeding of the 5,000, the walking of the water, anything else. The thing that more recorded than anything else that there is that he died on the cross. Of the 45 ancient sources, 28 relate to this fact, often with details. 12 of these sources are non-Christian. So it's not just Christian writers, which exhibit an incredible amount of interest in this event. Norman Geisler says, there is more evidence that Jesus died than there is that most important people in the ancient world ever lived. So someone like Caesar might be an example, Augustus or Julius might be an example, for example. But for most of the people that are important in ancient history, we have less information to confirm that they really lived than we have of Jesus really died. And a Journal of the American Medical Association back in 1986 looked at the accounts of what happened here around Jesus's death on the cross and concluded this. Clearly, the weight of historical and medical evidence indicates that Jesus was dead, the spear and the water and the blood coming out, was inflicted, and supports the traditional view that the spear thrust between his right ribs probably perforated not only the right lung, but also the pericardium and heart, and thereby ensured his death. Accordingly, interpretations based on the assumption that Jesus did not die on the cross to be at odds with modern medical knowledge. So when Romans crucify someone, they're dead, right? And when they're going to come take his body or ask for his body, uh, they're going to, Pilate's going to go, is he dead? Yeah, he's dead. Okay. So they know when he's dead. Now, there is one documented situation in ancient history of someone surviving crucifixion. So just bring that out there. In Josephus's autobiography, he writes of an account where 3 people that were captives were crucified at the same time. They were put on the cross. But this is a long process. And somewhere in there, probably very early on, Josephus at that point had a relationship with Titus. I got to read the autobiography so I know exactly where it was in Josephus's timeline. But he went to Tiberius and said, "Hey, we got to stop this. These guys, we can't kill these guys." And so Tiberius granted it, and they brought him down. And 2 of them, even though they're all being attended by doctors, still died. One guy did manage to live. So Josephus wrote this: "I saw many captives crucified and remembered 3 of them as my former acquaintances. I was very sorry at this in my mind, and went with tears in my eyes to Titus and told him of them. So he immediately commanded them to be taken down." So this is kind of like, last minute stay of execution. They're starting the lethal injection, and the Supreme Court says stop. So he immediately ordered that they be taken down and to have the greatest care taken of them. So bring in all the medical folks in order to their recovery. Yet 2 of them died under the physician's hands, while the 3rd one recovered. So Josephus doesn't tell us about the method of crucifixion or the duration. There are some modifications sometimes how they did it and how long they had been on the on a cross. But that there is one case of one person in all of history where it was deliberately intervened, and they managed to live. But that's an exception because that person had 2 other people with them at the same time. They didn't make it. And in Jesus's case, there was no, "Oh, get him down, get him down, get him down." They stabbed him in the side. Body fluids come out, and the blood and the water being separate tells us that he was already dead, because I guess the serums in the blood separate upon death, and that's why you have that. And then Pilate asked, "Is he dead?" Yeah, he's dead. So Jesus really died. That's the point. So, all right, with that, I'll stop the stream and we will